"The easiest way to recognize a true king," the old gardener once whispered, "is to watch how people treat him when they believe he has nothing to offer." Dawn settled over Ravencrest Manor in a wash of pale silver light, turning the ancient stone walls into quiet shadows while servants hurried through the sprawling estate preparing for the moon banquet, the grand celebration that would welcome nobles from every corner of the Northern Territories. Every polished chandelier, every banner stitched with silver wolves, every marble corridor seemed to promise elegance, yet beneath the glitter lived a quieter truth. Status ruled everything inside Ravencrest. The powerful spoke. The fortunate were praised. The forgotten became invisible. Evelyn Carter had learned that lesson long ago, though she refused to let it harden her heart. At 23, she moved through the manor carrying fresh linens and baskets of herbs with calm determination, greeting every cook, stable hand, and maid by name, offering warm smiles that often surprised people more than expensive gifts ever could. Her kindness puzzled the household because it was given freely, without expecting reward. Many considered that a weakness. Others quietly admired it, but lacked the courage to follow her example. As the morning grew busier, whispers swept through the kitchens about a newly hired servant assigned to maintenance duties. No one seemed interested in learning his story. They simply noticed his plain clothes, his worn leather boots, and the faded gloves covering rough hands marked by honest labor. Someone laughed when he accidentally brushed dust onto a polished railing. Another servant rolled his eyes and shoved another broom toward him without so much as a greeting. "Move faster," the steward barked. "You should be grateful anyone hired you." The young man merely nodded, lowered his gaze, and continued working without complaint. Evelyn watched from the hallway, uncomfortable with how quickly strangers could become targets. She carried a tray filled with warm rolls meant for the banquet staff, then quietly stepped away from the busy corridor before anyone noticed. She crossed the courtyard where cool mountain air carried the scent of pine and fresh rain. The servant had paused beside an old stone fountain, rubbing one tired hand against the other as though the chilly morning had settled into his bones. "You missed breakfast," Evelyn said gently. The man looked up, clearly surprised that someone had spoken to him with kindness instead of orders. His gray eyes reflected the morning sky, calm, yet strangely unreadable, as though they had witnessed far more than a simple servant's life ever should. "The kitchen was busy," he answered with a quiet smile. "There wasn't time." Evelyn placed 2 warm rolls into his hands along with a small apple she had saved from her own meal. "There is always time to eat," she replied. "No one does good work on an empty stomach." For a brief second, something changed in his expression. It was not gratitude alone. It looked almost like disbelief, as though genuine compassion had become unfamiliar to him. "Thank you," he said softly. "Most people don't notice servants." Evelyn smiled without hesitation. Everyone deserves to be noticed. Before either of them could say another word, the steward's sharp voice echoed across the courtyard, ordering the servant back to work while several nobles passed nearby without sparing him a glance. Evelyn returned to her duties, unaware that more than one pair of eyes had quietly observed the exchange from the manor balconies above. She also never noticed the nearly invisible silver crest stitched beneath the inside cuff of the servant's weathered sleeve, hidden carefully from every curious gaze. Had she seen it, she might have understood why the stranger's calm eyes carried the weight of command, why seasoned guards instinctively lowered their heads whenever he walked past unnoticed, and why the fate of Ravencrest Manor had already begun to change with nothing more extraordinary than a shared piece of bread and a simple act of kindness. Evelyn discovered that the quiet servant named Adrian always managed to appear wherever the hardest work waited. Before sunrise, he carried heavy sacks of grain into the kitchens without complaint. By mid-morning, he repaired loose stone along the garden paths that wealthy guests would never notice unless something was broken. In the afternoon, he helped the stable hands brush exhausted horses after long journeys from distant territories. He never asked for recognition, and somehow that made the other servants overlook him even more. It troubled Evelyn because she had grown up believing that character was revealed in ordinary moments rather than grand ceremonies. Every afternoon, she found a small excuse to pass through whichever corner of Ravencrest Manor Adrian had been assigned. Sometimes she brought an extra cup of warm cider. Other days, she carried fresh bandages from the infirmary because his hands were often scratched from repairing fences or lifting rough lumber. When she offered them, Adrian accepted with quiet gratitude, but never with self-pity. Instead, he thanked her as though she had given him something priceless. The strange part was not his humility. It was the calm confidence hidden beneath it. He listened more than he spoke, yet whenever Evelyn shared stories about the manor, he asked thoughtful questions that sounded less like curiosity and more like someone carefully assembling pieces of a puzzle. He remembered every servant's name after hearing it only once. He noticed which cooks skipped meals while preparing feasts for nobles who would never thank them. He even stopped to help an elderly gardener gather fallen branches after a sudden afternoon wind scattered them across the courtyard. None of those small moments escaped Evelyn's attention. Meanwhile, the rest of the household continued preparing for the moon banquet with growing excitement. Noble families arrived in polished carriages stretching nearly 20 feet long, their polished crests shining beneath the autumn sun. Expensive gowns swept across marble floors while polished boots echoed through towering halls. Conversations revolved around wealth, influence, and the possibility that the mysterious Alpha King himself might soon visit the region. Rumors spread faster than wildfire. Some claimed he traveled with hundreds of royal guards. Others insisted he disguised himself whenever he wished to test the loyalty of powerful families. The stories sounded impossible, and most people laughed them away before returning to their own ambitions. Evelyn paid little attention to gossip. She was far more interested in making certain every guest felt welcome, whether they wore velvet robes or simple work clothes. That afternoon, she found Adrian repairing an old wooden bench overlooking the gardens. One leg remained uneven, forcing him to steady it with one hand while tightening a loose bolt with the other. Without saying a word, she knelt beside him, holding the bench steady until the repair was finished. Adrian looked at her with quiet surprise. "You do not have to help," he said gently. Evelyn smiled as leaves drifted through the cool breeze around them. Helping someone should never require a reason. For the first time, a faint laugh escaped him, warm and genuine, transforming the reserved expression he usually carried. In that brief moment, he no longer looked like an ordinary servant weighed down by endless chores. He looked like someone who had almost forgotten what hope felt like before unexpectedly finding it again. From a second-floor balcony, the stern estate steward happened to witness the exchange. His disapproving frown deepened. To him, Evelyn was wasting precious time on someone who could never improve her future. He quietly turned away, already deciding that both of them would soon learn exactly where society believed they belonged. Neither Evelyn nor Adrian noticed his silent departure, but the peaceful afternoon suddenly felt much shorter, as though unseen events had already begun moving toward them with steady and unavoidable purpose. The excitement surrounding the moon banquet grew stronger with every passing hour until Ravencrest Manor seemed to breathe with restless anticipation. Carriages rolled through the front gates one after another, their polished wheels crunching across white gravel while banners bearing the crests of influential families fluttered above the towers. Servants hurried through endless corridors carrying silver trays, crystal glasses, embroidered tablecloths, and towering arrangements of fresh white lilies. Every detail had to be flawless because the guest gathering beneath Ravencrest's roof held enough influence to shape the future of entire territories. Yet amid all the grandeur, Adrian continued working quietly as though none of it concerned him. He repaired cracked lantern posts near the eastern gardens, swept fallen leaves from marble staircases, and answered every request with the same calm courtesy that had first caught Evelyn's attention. She noticed something else as well. No matter where Adrian happened to be, he seemed unusually aware of everything unfolding around him. He observed conversations without appearing to listen. He recognized visiting nobles before anyone introduced them. Once, he even stepped aside moments before a frightened horse broke loose from its handler, calmly helping guide the animal back without panic while everyone else scrambled in surprise. Evelyn thanked him afterward, but Adrian only smiled and said that paying attention often prevented unnecessary trouble. His answer lingered in her thoughts longer than she expected. Later that afternoon, while arranging candles inside the grand ballroom, Evelyn accidentally overheard several young nobles laughing near the entrance. They were speaking about servants as though they were furniture rather than people. One man boasted that loyal workers could always be replaced. Another joked that kindness toward common laborers only encouraged laziness. Their laughter echoed across the polished marble floor. Evelyn quietly lowered her eyes and continued placing candles, unwilling to argue, yet unable to agree. As she carried the empty box back toward the storage hall, she found Adrian lifting a heavy wooden chest onto a supply cart by himself. Without hesitation, she grasped the opposite handle. Together, they eased it into place. Adrian looked at her with the same gentle gratitude she had come to recognize. "You always appear when the work becomes difficult," he said. Evelyn brushed a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear and smiled. "Maybe difficult work simply has a way of finding me." Before either of them could continue, hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway. The estate steward appeared, accompanied by two anxious attendants. His face had lost its usual confidence. "Everyone stop what you are doing," he announced sharply. "The ceremonial moonstone has disappeared." Silence swept through the corridor. Every servant understood what that meant. The moonstone rested at the center of the banquet hall each year as a symbol of unity between the great packs. Losing it only hours before the celebration would bring humiliation upon Ravencrest Manor. Panic spread quickly as servants searched cupboards, storage rooms, kitchens, gardens, and guest chambers. Noble visitors whispered among themselves while suspicion quietly replaced celebration. Evelyn joined the search without hesitation, checking every room assigned to her duties. Adrian searched as well, remaining composed while others grew increasingly nervous. Nearly an hour passed before a loud voice called everyone toward the central courtyard. A velvet pouch had been discovered inside a supply cart used earlier that afternoon. The steward reached inside with dramatic certainty before lifting the missing moonstone into the fading sunlight. Gasps rippled across the gathering crowd. Then the steward slowly turned toward Adrian. "This cart belonged to our newest servant," he declared. "Explain how the moonstone found its way into your possession." Every eye shifted toward the quiet man who had accepted nothing but hard work since arriving at Ravencrest. Evelyn stared at Adrian in disbelief, searching his calm expression for confusion rather than guilt. He did not protest. He did not panic. Instead, he simply met the steward's eyes with remarkable composure, almost as though he had been expecting this moment long before anyone else realized the game had begun. Evelyn felt the weight of hundreds of silent eyes settle across the courtyard, as though the evening air itself had become too heavy to breathe. The moonstone shimmered inside the steward's hands, its pale silver glow reflecting against polished marble, while whispers spread through the gathered servants and noble guests. Only a few minutes earlier the manor had been preparing for celebration. Now suspicion had replaced music before the first note had even been played. The steward stepped forward with quiet satisfaction, lifting the velvet pouch for everyone to see. "The evidence speaks for itself," he announced. The newest servant was trusted with this supply cart, and now the sacred moonstone has been found hidden inside it. Murmurs of disappointment rippled through the crowd. Several nobles shook their heads as though the outcome had been obvious from the beginning. One elderly lord remarked that strangers should never be welcomed into respectable households. Another woman quietly commented that humble appearances often concealed dishonest intentions. Adrian remained perfectly still. His expression never hardened with anger nor collapsed into fear. Instead, he answered with calm respect. "I did not place the moonstone inside that cart." The steward folded his arms. "Convenient words. Can you prove them?" Adrian looked toward the gathering without lowering his head. "No," he replied honestly. "Not yet." That single answer seemed to confirm every suspicion already growing inside the crowd. Evelyn watched servants she had worked beside for years slowly step away from Adrian as though kindness itself had become dangerous. She recognized uncertainty on many faces, yet not one person dared question the accusation. Protecting a servant carried no reward. Remaining silent carried no risk. The realization hurt more than she expected. She stepped forward before fear could persuade her otherwise. "I do not believe he took it," she said clearly. The courtyard fell silent again. Even the steward looked genuinely surprised. "Miss Carter," he replied carefully, "be mindful of what you are saying." Evelyn lifted her chin. "I have watched Adrian since the day he arrived. He has repaired broken paths, helped exhausted workers, shared difficult tasks, and treated everyone with respect. None of that resembles the actions of someone willing to betray the household. A few servants exchanged uneasy glances, remembering quiet moments when Adrian had helped them without expecting gratitude. Still, no one joined Evelyn. The steward's expression hardened. Character is not evidence. Neither is assumption, Evelyn answered softly. The words lingered across the courtyard. Several nobles frowned at what they considered unacceptable boldness from a young woman of modest standing. The steward drew a slow breath before speaking again. The banquet cannot proceed while questions remain. Until this matter is resolved, the accused will be removed from all duties, and anyone choosing to defend him accepts responsibility for delaying preparations. His gaze settled directly upon Evelyn. The warning needed no further explanation. Standing beside Adrian could cost her reputation inside Ravencrest. It might even cost her position within the household she had faithfully served for years. A close friend quietly approached and whispered for her to step back before she made a terrible mistake. Evelyn appreciated the concern, but she remembered the lonely figure beside the fountain holding warm bread with quiet gratitude only days before. Kindness meant very little if it disappeared the moment it became inconvenient. She slowly crossed the remaining distance until she stood beside Adrian in full view of every guest. She did not touch his arm or make dramatic promises. She simply chose not to leave him standing alone. Adrian turned toward her, genuine surprise softening the calm certainty that usually filled his gray eyes. For the first time since arriving at Ravencrest, there was unmistakable emotion behind his composed expression. "You should not risk this," he said quietly. Evelyn offered the same gentle smile she had shared beside the old garden bench. "If doing what is right costs something," she answered, "then perhaps it was valuable enough to protect in the first place." Far above the courtyard, hidden behind the highest balcony where no guest thought to look, a figure wearing the dark uniform of the Royal Wolf Guard silently lowered his head before disappearing into the shadows, carrying with him news that would soon change the destiny of everyone gathered inside Ravencrest Manor. The last rays of sunlight slipped behind the distant mountains, leaving Ravencrest Manor wrapped in a deep blue twilight that made every lantern glow like scattered stars. Yet no music filled the grand courtyard. No laughter drifted through the marble halls. Guests who had traveled hundreds of miles now stood in uneasy silence, watching the strange scene unfold before them. The sacred moonstone rested upon a velvet cushion while Adrian remained where he had been asked to stand, calm despite the suspicion surrounding him. Evelyn stayed only a few feet away, refusing to abandon him even as quiet whispers spread through the crowd. Some admired her courage. Most believed she had made the worst decision of her life. The steward appeared ready to order the servant escorted away when an unfamiliar sound echoed across the valley. It began as a single deep horn rolling through the evening air. Then came another, and another. The powerful notes carried across the forest with perfect rhythm, rich enough to silence every conversation before the final echo disappeared among the hills. Every noble immediately straightened. Several elderly lords exchanged startled glances. One woman nearly dropped the jeweled fan she had been holding. The steward's face turned pale. "That cannot be," someone whispered. "The Royal Wolf Guard only announces itself that way." Moments later, the massive front gates of Ravencrest slowly swung open. Instead of a crowded procession, only 12 riders entered the estate, each wearing dark silver armor polished so brightly that it reflected the torchlight like moonlit water. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, their expressions unreadable. None spoke. None looked toward the assembled guests. They rode directly through the center of the courtyard before stopping in a flawless line. The silence became almost unbearable. Every servant lowered their head. Every noble instinctively stepped backward. The captain of the guard dismounted first. Without a single wasted motion, he removed one black glove and placed his closed fist over his heart. His voice carried across the courtyard with calm authority. "By order of the crown, no judgment shall be passed until the rightful authority has spoken." Confused murmurs swept through the gathering. The steward hurried forward, forcing a respectful smile. "Captain, we are honored by your unexpected visit. Had we known the Royal Guard was coming, proper arrangements would have been made." The captain did not answer him. Instead, His gaze moved quietly across the courtyard before settling upon Adrian. For one impossibly long moment, neither man spoke. Then, in perfect unison, every member of the Royal Wolf Guard stepped forward exactly one pace before lowering onto one knee. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The steward blinked in disbelief. Noble guests stared as though they had forgotten how to breathe. Evelyn looked from the kneeling guards to Adrian, unable to understand what she was seeing. Surely there had been some terrible mistake. Adrian slowly drew a quiet breath. His eyes met Evelyn's for only a brief second, and within that silent glance, she saw something she had never noticed before. It was not fear. It was sadness, mixed with quiet gratitude, as though he regretted that the peaceful days of anonymity had finally reached their end. The captain lifted both hands and presented a folded cloak embroidered with a silver wolf crest unlike any banner displayed inside Ravencrest Manor. Every thread shimmered beneath the lantern light with unmistakable royal craftsmanship. "Your Majesty," the captain said clearly enough for every soul present to hear, "your command has been faithfully carried out. The test is complete." The words struck the courtyard with greater force than any shout ever could. Evelyn felt her heartbeat pause as every memory from the past several days rushed together inside her mind. The quiet servant beside the fountain, the thoughtful questions, the steady confidence, the strange respect hidden behind humble manners. Nothing around her seemed real anymore as Adrian slowly reached toward the royal cloak, and the stunned silence hanging over Ravencrest became the beginning of a truth that could no longer remain hidden. No one moved. The evening breeze drifted across the silent courtyard, carrying the scent of pine and burning lantern oil, while hundreds of stunned eyes remained fixed upon Adrian. He accepted the royal cloak with slow, deliberate grace, almost reluctantly, as though he understood that the quiet life he had briefly enjoyed inside Ravencrest Manor had come to its inevitable end. With one smooth motion, he removed the plain servant's coat that had hidden his identity for days. Beneath it rested a finely tailored black uniform marked with intricate silver embroidery that only members of the royal household were permitted to wear. The faint silver crest concealed inside his sleeve was no longer a secret. It rested proudly above his heart. Every member of the Royal Wolf Guard lowered their heads even farther. The captain spoke again, his voice steady and unwavering. "Long live His Majesty, Adrian Ashford, Alpha King of the Northern Territories." A wave of disbelief swept through the gathering. Noble guests who had ignored him only hours before instinctively bowed their heads. Several servants gasped aloud before quickly kneeling. The steward's face drained of every trace of confidence as realization settled over him like winter frost. Evelyn remained frozen where she stood, unable to reconcile the humble servant she had shared bread with beside the old fountain and the powerful ruler now standing before an entire kingdom's representatives. Adrian turned slowly, his silver gray eyes meeting the faces surrounding him. His calm expression had not changed. He did not appear angry. He did not seem eager to celebrate. Instead, quiet disappointment rested behind his gaze. "Please rise," he said gently. His voice carried naturally across the courtyard without effort, commanding attention not through fear, but through quiet certainty. The guards obeyed immediately. The nobles followed. Only the steward hesitated before slowly lifting his head. Adrian walked toward the velvet cushion where the moonstone still rested untouched. He studied it for a brief moment before looking toward the steward. "You believe this stone revealed guilt," he said calmly. "It revealed something far more valuable." Confusion spread across several faces. Adrian continued. "Before arriving at Ravencrest, I ordered a simple test. The moonstone was never stolen. It was temporarily hidden by members of my own guard with the knowledge of the crown." Audible gasps echoed throughout the courtyard. "The purpose was never to discover who could protect a jewel," Adrian said. "It was to discover who would protect another human being when doing so offered no advantage." His words settled heavily upon everyone present. The steward lowered his eyes, unable to answer. Adrian's gaze slowly traveled across the gathered nobles. "Many of you judged a servant before seeking truth. You measured worth by clothing, position, and appearance. You assumed honesty belonged only to those born into privilege." No one dared interrupt him. Then Adrian turned toward Evelyn. For the first time since revealing his identity, warmth returned to his expression. "Miss Carter," he said softly, "while others saw only a servant, you offered respect. While others remained silent, you chose compassion despite knowing it could cost your reputation. You defended someone you believed had nothing to give you in return." Evelyn struggled to find words. "Your Majesty, I only did what felt right." Adrian smiled, not with royal pride, but with genuine admiration. "That is precisely why it mattered." He glanced once more across the silent courtyard. A kingdom is not measured by the wealth of its nobles or the height of its walls. It is measured by the kindness its people extend to those who cannot repay them. Every sentence seemed to lift another layer of illusion from the gathering. The magnificent banquet, the jeweled gowns, the polished titles, all suddenly felt insignificant beside one quiet act of compassion offered beside an old stone fountain. And as the evening star slowly appeared above Ravencrest Manor, Evelyn finally understood that the greatest secret had never been that a king disguised himself as a servant. It was that true greatness had quietly been searching for genuine goodness all along. The silence that followed the Alpha King's words lingered longer than anyone expected. It was the kind of silence that forced people to confront truths they had spent years avoiding. Adrian allowed the moment to settle before slowly turning toward the captain of the Royal Wolf Guard. "Begin the review," he instructed. The captain stepped forward carrying a leather journal embossed with the royal crest. "During His Majesty's stay at Ravencrest," he announced, "every significant interaction was quietly documented by members of the Crown. No conversations were interrupted. No situations were manipulated beyond the placement of the moonstone. The purpose was observation alone." Murmurs spread once again through the courtyard. Several nobles exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly remembering careless words they had spoken to someone they believed was an insignificant servant. The captain opened the journal. On the first morning, the kitchen staff refused the servant breakfast despite extra food remaining. He paused before continuing. Miss Evelyn Carter voluntarily shared her own meal. He turned another page. On the second day, multiple workers ignored an elderly gardener struggling with storm damage. The servant assisted without being asked. Miss Carter joined him. Another page. On the third afternoon, several guests mocked the servant's appearance while passing through the Eastern Gardens. Miss Carter was the only witness who acknowledged his dignity. Every sentence seemed to remove another layer of confidence from those who had once felt untouchable. Adrian did not interrupt the reading. He simply listened, allowing actions to speak more clearly than accusations ever could. When the captain finally closed the journal, Adrian faced the steward. "You believed authority meant deciding another person's worth before seeking truth," he said calmly. "Leadership requires something far greater. It requires fairness." The steward lowered his head. "Your Majesty, I allowed appearances to influence my judgment. I failed the responsibility entrusted to me." Adrian studied him for a quiet moment before answering. "A mistake honestly admitted becomes a lesson. A mistake defended becomes a habit." Relief softened several anxious faces as they realized the Alpha King sought understanding rather than humiliation. Adrian then addressed the assembled nobles. "Those who serve this kingdom should never fear being treated with less dignity because of their station. Wealth may earn admiration. Character earns trust." His words settled deeply among the guests. More than one noble quietly reflected upon conversations they wished they could take back. Several servants who had remained silent earlier now looked toward Evelyn with growing respect. One elderly cook stepped forward first. "Miss Carter," she said gently, "I should have stood beside you." Another servant nodded in agreement. Soon others offered quiet apologies, not because they had been ordered to, but because they recognized the courage they themselves had lacked. Evelyn accepted every apology with the same humility that had guided her from the beginning. She did not seek recognition. She only hoped people might treat one another differently after that evening. Adrian noticed the sincerity in her response, and his admiration grew stronger. Most people who received public praise quickly allowed pride to replace compassion. Evelyn remained exactly the same woman who had once offered a tired stranger a piece of warm bread beside an old stone fountain. That quiet consistency impressed him more than any grand gesture ever could. As lanterns illuminated the courtyard beneath a sky filled with countless stars, Ravencrest Manor no longer felt like the same place. The marble halls had not changed. The banners still fluttered in the evening breeze. Yet something invisible had shifted inside the hearts of those gathered there. They had witnessed a king reveal himself, but more importantly, they had witnessed the quiet strength of ordinary kindness become the standard by which true greatness would now be measured. The formal review ended, yet no one seemed eager to leave the courtyard. The banquet that had once promised an evening of celebration had quietly transformed into something far more meaningful. Servants stood beside nobles without the invisible walls that had separated them only hours before. Soft music finally began drifting from the ballroom, but it remained little more than a distant melody beneath the cool autumn sky. Adrian slowly stepped away from the assembled guests and walked toward the old stone fountain where everything had truly begun. The gentle sound of flowing water filled the silence between him and Evelyn as she followed, uncertain whether she should speak first or simply allow the moment to pass. She stopped a respectful distance away, lowering her eyes. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I should have recognized who you were." Adrian smiled with surprising warmth. "No," he answered. "If you had recognized me, this conversation would never have mattered." Evelyn looked up, confused. Adrian rested one hand against the weathered edge of the fountain, his expression thoughtful as moonlight reflected across the water. "Everywhere I travel, people bow before my title long before they know my character. They offer perfect manners because they fear disappointing a king. Very few offer simple kindness without expecting something in return." He turned toward her, his silver-gray eyes carrying none of the distance usually associated with a ruler. "You never bowed to a crown you could not see. You respected a person everyone else overlooked." Evelyn searched for the right words, but found only honesty. "I never saw a servant," she admitted softly. "I only saw someone who looked tired, someone who had been treated as though he did not matter. My parents taught me that kindness loses its value if we save it only for important people." Adrian's quiet smile grew deeper. "Then they gave this kingdom a greater gift than they ever realized." A gentle breeze stirred the nearby trees, sending golden leaves drifting across the surface of the fountain. Neither of them hurried to fill the silence. Somehow the quiet itself felt comfortable. Adrian finally spoke again. "When I arrived at Ravencrest, I believed I was testing the loyalty of noble families." He gave a small shake of his head. "Instead, I discovered something I had not expected to find." Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. "What was that?" Adrian looked directly into her eyes with complete sincerity. "A woman who reminded me that goodness does not announce itself with titles, wealth, or power. It reveals itself through ordinary choices made when no one is watching." Evelyn felt unexpected emotion rise within her. During the past several days, she had believed she was simply helping a lonely servant. She had never imagined those small decisions would reach the heart of the Alpha King himself. Adrian reached inside his royal cloak and removed the same simple cloth that had once wrapped the warm bread she had shared beside the fountain. He had carefully folded it and kept it with him throughout every moment of the test. "Most rulers receive precious gifts," he said quietly. "Jewels, gold, rare treasures. Yet this piece of cloth reminds me of the first person who offered generosity without knowing who stood before her. To me, it is worth more than any crown jewel." Evelyn's eyes filled with grateful emotion, not because of his words alone, but because she realized he had treasured a memory she had almost forgotten. Above them, the stars stretched across the clear night sky, while the lights of Ravencrest Manor glowed warmly behind them. For the first time since they had met, neither a servant nor a king stood beside the fountain. There were simply two people whose lives had been forever changed by one quiet act of compassion. Morning sunlight poured across the capital like liquid gold as church bells echoed through every street, announcing a ceremony unlike any the kingdom had witnessed in generations. People gathered along the broad stone avenues long before sunrise, not because they had been ordered to attend, but because the remarkable events at Ravencrest Manor had already spread from village to village. Travelers spoke of a king who had hidden beneath ordinary clothes. Servants whispered about a young woman whose kindness had never depended upon titles. Parents quietly repeated the story to their children, hoping they would remember its lesson long after the celebration ended. Inside the royal hall, sunlight streamed through towering windows, illuminating silver banners embroidered with the ancient wolf crest. Noble families stood beside craftsmen, merchants, soldiers, gardeners, cooks, and stable hands. For perhaps the first time in living memory, every corner of the kingdom shared the same room, without invisible walls dividing them. Adrian stood before the great throne wearing the royal cloak he had once set aside, yet his expression remained as calm and approachable as it had beside the old fountain. When the ceremonial doors opened, every conversation faded into respectful silence. Evelyn entered wearing a graceful ivory gown that reflected elegance without extravagance. She had not asked for jewels or elaborate decorations. She carried herself exactly as she always had, with quiet confidence and genuine humility. As she walked forward, many of the servants from Ravencrest smiled through grateful tears, remembering the countless ordinary moments that had led them all to this extraordinary day. Adrian descended the steps before anyone expected him to. Instead of waiting upon the raised platform, he crossed the remaining distance himself until he stood before Evelyn. A gentle smile touched his face. "The kingdom has celebrated my crown for many years," he said, his voice carrying warmly through the hall. "Today I wish to celebrate the heart that reminded me why the crown exists." He extended his hand, and Evelyn accepted it with quiet grace. The royal chancellor presented a beautifully crafted silver pendant bearing the symbol of the moon and the wolf, not as a reward for ambition, but as recognition of compassion that had already changed countless lives. Applause slowly filled the hall, growing stronger with every passing moment until it echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling like rolling thunder. Adrian turned toward the gathered crowd. "Many believed greatness could be recognized by wealth, influence, or power," he said. "But I found greatness beside an old stone fountain in the hands of someone who expected nothing in return. Let every child in this kingdom know that kindness is never small, because even the simplest act may change a destiny no one can yet see." The hall fell quiet once more, not from obligation, but from understanding. Evelyn looked across the familiar faces gathered before her and realized that the greatest gift she had received was not royal honor or public admiration. It was watching people begin to see one another differently. The steward from Ravencrest stood among the guests with sincere gratitude, replacing old pride. Servants who had once felt invisible now walked with renewed confidence. Noble families greeted workers by name. Small changes had already begun, and together they carried the promise of a better future. As the ceremony came to its close, Adrian and Evelyn stepped onto the palace balcony overlooking thousands of smiling faces gathered below. The morning breeze carried the scent of pine from distant forests, reminding them both of the quiet days when none of this seemed possible. Adrian gently squeezed Evelyn's hand before looking toward the bright horizon. She returned the smile that had first welcomed a weary servant without knowing who he truly was. In that peaceful moment, everyone understood the lesson that would be remembered for generations. A crown may reveal a king, but only kindness reveals the person worthy of standing beside one.